I'd like to welcome you to the Unmasked Relationship Factor Series. I am AliNICOLE WOW, also known as Majesty, and I'm excited to be once again joined by my star Queen Celebrity-preneur Protégé, Gina Gardiner, and we're going to have a great discussion. I already know this. As you all know, during these segments, never have a planned agenda or topic. We just kind of see what's going to come up in the moment, but I am sure that you will be enriched by what we conversate about today. Gina, thank you once again for being here.
Always a pleasure. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, I am too. You know, it's really exciting when we can come together and talk about such important topics, and especially around relationships. And you and I have done trainings together, and then you've also been, featured in this particular series, as well. And that's why I definitely wanted to have you to come back, because we had a very rich conversation last time, and I'm sure that what we'll provide today will continue the extension, of great relationship dynamics focus. So we'll see what's going to come up today, right?
I'm excited to see where it takes us, because it always takes us on a very interesting journey.
Yeah, yes, it does. And you know what? Something that's actually coming up right now is, with you being the founder of Genuinely You and also Genuinely You Leadership, it's really important that people actually learn how to be genuine in relationships, actually starting with themselves and being authentic. So, that might be a great jump off for this conversation today. What do you think about that?
I think we could probably fill a couple of days talking about
Yeah, you're
just
right about that. Right. So let's actually talk about that, because I think that there's a grave danger when people aren't true to themselves, first knowing who they are, obviously, and then being genuine, because a lot of times people aren't actually being honest in relationships. And when I say honest, not necessarily not being honest with themselves per se, but sometimes they aren't being honest with people about how they feel, which does play into being genuine and being truly authentic. If you can't be real about how you feel and to share that, then you're doing yourself a disservice, but also the other person in the relationship. Your thoughts around that?
well, it strikes me that many people find it very difficult to know who they are authentically,
Mm-hmm.
because they've been conditioned by parents, by teachers, society to behave in a particular way.
Right.
And so often it's felt that you can't be honest, because if you are honest, you'll upset somebody, or it will be that you'll be seen to be selfish.
Mm-hmm.
When the reality is, it's not about so much about uh, being honest with other people about how you're feeling, but being honest with yourself and
Right.
recognizing that every emotion, and we talk about positive and negative emotions, I don't actually like that way of looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
because all emotions have something to teach us.
Absolutely.
They're giving us a message, aren't they? This doesn't sit well with my
But they're the
values.
best communicators. Absolutely. When we tune into them, we can learn so much, for sure.
And ultimately, when we're prepared to acknowledge our emotional state, how we
Mhm.
feel, and rather than bury it, because what people do is they say nothing, and they bury the frustration or the anger
Mhm.
or hurt, and they say nothing, and they say nothing, and then suddenly it can't be contained anymore.
Right, right.
They explode,
Mhm.
and the person on the receiving end has no idea of what's been building up over hours, days, weeks, months, years, even decades, and then
Right.
suddenly the explosion comes, and people think that the explosion is the feeling, and so become more afraid of the feeling,
Mhm.
rather than recognizing that it's this pent up reservoir of
Right.
feeling that has not been acknowledged
Mhm.
and not been um, given a voice. And so it's
Right.
about how you do it, when you do it. Um, but I would say to anyone listening to this, if you want to be truly authentic, a big part of that is to be in touch with your own feelings
Right.
and not to make judgments and stories. We talk a lot, don't we, about
Yes, we do.
making up stories about those things.
Right.
Anger in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's what you do with it that makes it good or bad. And there are times when it's perfectly appropriate.
Absolutely.
Angry.
Absolutely.
Um,
It's actually biblical. It's actually biblical. There's a scripture that talks about, in your anger, it's okay to be angry, but in your anger, don't sin. Meaning you got to be mindful about what you do with your anger. Anger is a raw emotion, and
yes.
it's not necessarily looked at as just as a negative emotion. It just depends on how it's placed, how it's categorized, how it's leveraged and what you do, with that. Sometimes there's a positive anger. Sometimes you do need to get a little angry or frustrated to the point where you actually stop doing something or you don't allow certain things to continue.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Or you start to recognize that you need to change the way in which you turn. And a seemingly simple example is that of setting boundaries.
Right.
People will often be angry because people overstep the boundaries. But my question would always be, how clear are you about those boundaries and why they're important to you? And when people overstep those boundaries, and that's particularly important in any relationship, whether it's personal, whether it's family, friends, or an intimate relationship,
even professionals, right?
Relationship,
right?
That you need to be clear about what your expectations are and why. And if somebody crosses the boundary, to say, actually, when you do that, it has this impact on me. Not that you're wrong, but ultimately be aware that your behaviours, your language, your whatever has an impact on me, and that's not acceptable.
Right. And it is important to communicate that and not to be afraid to communicate that too, even if the other person or other parties kind of buck up against that. Sometimes you do have to stand your own ground, so to speak, and just make it clear. But I believe that the way that we carry ourselves sets the tone for how other people participate within our experiences. And so sometimes people get away with things or try to because they feel that they can. So it's important that we up front carry ourselves differently too. Yeah.
I think that's so important, and that comes with the being honest, the being authentic. And I'll give you two examples that I think that are really common, certainly in my experience of working with people. They're the people who huff and puff. They don't say anything, but they'll sit in the corner. Or they will withdraw because they're unhappy with what's going on. But it's never articulated, so the other person is expected to know by mind reading. And I'll give you a simple example of moms with their children or partners who don't help around the house and who become resentful because they've been out to work all day and they come home and everybody's sitting waiting for them to do dinner and to do everything. And instead of saying when they come in, come on, you lot, let's all get together, we can all help and we'll have dinner quicker, they huff and they puff and they go into the kitchen and they might, rattle a few saucepan lids, but they don't say anything and that resentment builds up. And so I would say to you, rather than huff and puff and feel resentful, without any high emotion, no whine, no anger, no edge to your voice, to simply say, come on, let's all pitch in and then we'll eat more quickly and it'll be fairer, rather than say nothing or go into
and feel like a victim, right?
And then the other example I would give is people who respond by being passively aggressive. They don't say anything, but they will go out and they'll slam the door. Or they'll go and they will start to be cutting, sarcastic or unkind because they're hurting.
Indirect, but being direct is in a different way.
They're destructive. And if you want a relationship to be, and I always look for interdependent
Yes,
relationship.
definitely.
Because the other thing I think we often find is that people will barter. You know,
Mhm.
I'll be loving to you if you do this for me.
Oh, very conditional.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I don't think that successful long-term relationships, personal or professional, are based on barter.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, anytime you start into that bartering and bargaining type
Yeah,
of intention, so to speak, that's a recipe for disaster.
it is. And it might in the short term feel as if it's working, but it comes at a cost. And that
Absolutely.
cost will eventually come back and bite you in the bottom.
Oh,
Um,
definitely, definitely,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So, I love where this has been going so far because I think it's really important. Of course, any dynamics within the relationship factor, communication and intention are always going to be very important in terms of
definitely. Yeah.
what we're putting out, and really we can do things up front. And I know some people are thinking, well, what if I'm already down this road with people and I didn't set this up front, well, there's no better time than the present, you know and even though there's that saying, when was the best time to plant a tree, 20 years ago maybe, but
25 years
yeah,
ago, yeah.
exactly, but there's no better time to do it today, because today and now is all that you have. And so that's where you start. And that's where you can actually start being true, genuine, being
Yeah,
authentic to who you are in this present moment. And don't allow previous moments or the past to define you in the relationship moving forward. So just as other people have the right to change their mind, you have the right to change your behavior. And technically, you're always under construction. So our relationship dynamics with ourselves, with others, are typically going to be under construction at some point. But we're going to
you know,
start
one,
moving. Go ahead.
sorry,
No,
I
go
can
ahead.
say one of the things that I think is incredibly important to recognize is you can't change other people.
Right.
Lots of people think that they get together in a relationship, and they the honeymoon period where the hormones and stuff are all going AWOL passes.
Yeah.
And the things that they thought, I'll change that, perhaps at an unconscious level, start to become irritating.
Right.
And what I would say is, you are the only person you can be truly responsible for is you. And if you want people to behave in a different way, then you don't start by trying to change them.
Right.
You have to change the way in which you approach what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do, the interesting thing is there's no guarantee, but when you consistently change the way in which you show up,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're more authentic, then pretty well without exception, you start to create a change in the other person.
Absolutely.
But it
Absolutely.
has to come from you. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a client who got a toxic relationship with her mother, and she dreaded spending time with her mother. And her mother was somebody who was, I think, very unhappy and who was very critical, and very sarcastic.
Mm-hmm.
And we, over a period of time, looked at how the client was feeding into that behavior by sitting and taking it all and getting upset, but not actually saying anything. And we started to work on, okay, what can you do differently? And one of them was to say to her mum, look, you're obviously not very happy. I'm going to go for a walk. And when you come back, I'll make you a cup of tea, and perhaps, you'll be feeling happier. Or when her mum was leading off, to go and give her mum a hug rather than get into a spat with her, or to
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
feel like. And interestingly, within a very short space of time, given that my client was in her 50s and her mum was in her 80s, within a relatively short space of time, things started to change.
Great.
And so as soon as her mum was being unkind, the client would say, look, I'm just going to go to my room for a minute, or I'm just going to go for a walk. But what she was making very clear is, I'm not staying here for you to be nasty to me.
Right, exactly, right.
But at the same time, instead of retorting in a similar vein, which is something that she had two ways of behaving previously, one was to get upset and one was to go into attack. Instead of that, it was to actually leave her mum to her own angst and
Right,
frustration.
right.
But the other was to be very loving
Mm-hmm.
and to say, Mum, I love you, but actually, I don't think that I want to listen to this. I'm
Right.
going to go around.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't she just escaped, but she was very clear. While you're like this, I don't want to be here. I'll go and do something else. So when you come back, then perhaps we can start again.
Right. That was well approached and handled.
And
Definitely.
I think so many relationships, people avoid saying anything because they don't want to upset the person, or they don't want to be seen to be upset, or they don't quite know what to say. And being in a situation where you really start to look at how are you feeding that drama.
Right.
I was talking to
Good
somebody
point.
yesterday.
Good point.
Her response is to say, don't buy a ticket to the circus if you don't want to be part of the ring, the circus ring. And I think that's a really good way of
Oh,
looking.
absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Don't purchase the ticket,
It's their drama, let them own it. It doesn't have to be
Absolutely.
yours unless you choose to make it so.
Yeah, exactly. Because you'll find yourself being part of that act. And even though you didn't plan on it, just by
Yeah,
entertaining it, it's like being in a comedy club or so. And the comedian points out, who's going to be the target for the joke. And he said, well, because you were there,
yeah,
you put
yeah.
yourself in a position for that to happen. And so, as you mentioned in the same vein, it's kind of the same when people entertain drama that they don't have to,
Yeah.
especially knowingly. That's the thing. And sometimes people actually do know that there's the potential for this to happen, and they still go for it.
And it becomes a habit, doesn't it, that people feed off that drama at some level. And for
Oh, yeah,
those
they
who like,
resonate with it, right? Yeah, but
and
then complain when
yeah,
it's interesting.
those who like to rescue can then swoop in and be the hero or
Oh,
heroine.
yes, of course.
Um, but in effect, you're colluding with people who are consistently creating drama.
Yes, it's interesting. Well, I tell you what, I've really enjoyed how this conversation even started in terms of the genuineness and
Yes.
and the way it's been, fleshed out. And something I do want to point out is, the fact that you and I do several works together, and then we have different trainings even for relationships, and then separate works as well. And of course, we'll have information for that, for those in the description, and information about you, and then also the previous segment that you were a part of, and once again over delivered in terms of your value, that you've shared. And it just goes to show just your vast, your experience around what you've been doing over the years for relationship empowerment and coaching and counseling, on so many different levels, whether it's been personal, whether it's been with couples, and even work related, relationships. Yeah, so it's been great. So I think that we could go ahead and start to wrap up, because I feel that we could talk about this like forever, right?
So good.
Definitely. So, is there anything that you would like to kind of leave in closing as a call to action, so to speak? And of course, I thank you so much for returning here, for us to have this tremendous conversation, because it has been nothing short of just phenomenal again.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. I am passionate about helping people step in to be leaders in their own life. And relationships are, for me, it's the very fabric of life. But they start with the relationship you have with you, and being honest with yourself, not judgmental, as we've said, not making up stories, but
Mhm.
actually recognizing that you're not broken and that you do have the power, the empowerment,
Yeah.
to look at relationships and uh, to to take a stance which is about you want things to be win-win, and that if you're so set on being right, you make somebody else wrong. But at the same time, nor do you have to be, the whipping boy for somebody else's bad temper or their issues. And so this is about being able to stand tall, metaphorically speaking, and recognise that you have huge worth. And that worth is at its best when you are being authentically you. And to say, if you're having a struggle, please reach out and get some help. Because ultimately, with a bit of help, you can solve a lot of the issues that you may have, and your life will be much more fulfilled and happier as a result. So will the lives of the people who you touch both personally and professionally.
Absolutely. That was well stated, and such a excellent note to really end on, because that really says it all. And this was so great. I'm going to encourage people to go back and continuously listen to this over and over so that it really sinks in and start to take action. We started off talking about the genuineness and how important that is. And you want to make sure that you are really showing up, being genuine and authentic, so you can display the best version of you, but also be able to put that out into relationships and have that reciprocated back to you versus what you are projecting, if you will. So Gina, thank you again for being here.
It's a huge pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You're most welcome. And just to close out again, the key theme today was about genuine. So I would say genuine relationships, and being genuinely you within those relationship dynamics. It will improve your world tremendously, trust me. So we've unmasked that today, unmasking the genuinely you, right, Julian?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and being that best version of the relationship. So look forward to you joining us again for more segments within this series. Again, go back and listen to this over and over, and check the description box where you can learn more about the work that Gina does and myself and what we do collectively as well. All right, sending you away with many blessings, and until next time, take care.